Welcome to Cool Cat Teacher Talk, where we talk about what matters in the classroom. Today, we have an exciting show for you where we're going to talk about classroom management and some of the tips that I teach new teachers and my favorite books to read when your class is out of control. Michelle Singh will help us understand that sometimes student engagement is preceded by teacher engagement and what you can do if you feel like you're not engaged in your classroom. Finally, as we talk about engagement, I'm going to give you an example of an amazing teacher, Andrew Vanden Heuvel, who is using Fortnite to teach physics. Yes, that's Fortnite Creative to teach physics and demonstrate how we can engage students even in difficult subjects. I'm excited to talk to you today. Welcome to Cool Cat Teacher Talk, Season 2, Episode 4.
Ever wondered how remarkable teaching happens? Find out right now at Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vicki Davis. Get insights from top educators, tech tips, and inspiration to elevate your teaching.
So when we talk about classroom management, this is something that has taken me a lot of years to develop. I could count probably on one hand how many office referrals I've had in the past 10 years. Every so often it happens and I deal with things quickly, but really, I want to deal with all of the issues in my classroom and prevent classroom management problems from even happening. But it took me a long time to get here. My first year, I was sending kids to the office left and right. Part of that is I came from the business world. I was the general manager of a cell phone market back in the early 90s, $4 million budget, 32 employees. And if I had someone who had a bad attitude, yep, I could fire them. I didn't do it often, but every so often it was necessary. Well, you can't fire your students. You have to teach whoever comes in that door. At first, it used to frustrate me, but now I find it so exciting because, as I've often said on this show, the name of my classroom is Masterpiece Theater. Every student is a masterpiece made before time began for good works. But I'll tell you, that first couple of years, I had issues. So the first thing I work hard to do with classroom management is to genuinely be interested in and like my students. Yes, I said like my students. Now, in my earlier years, I remember dreading, third period, I have to teach that student, or sixth period, I have to teach that student, or even found myself saying, my goodness, so-and-so is absent today. I'm so happy. Okay, when you have that happening, you realize that you have an attitude issue with a student. Now, certainly, sometimes it is warranted. The students who I struggle with liking were the ones who gave me the most trouble behaviorally. It seemed like they came in the classroom and they started to misbehave. Or back in the days of DVDs, I had one put nerds in my DVD player. I will say, your first couple years at a school are always the most difficult. I know this. I've been at 2 different schools. I was at one school for 16 years. And after I got a reputation of being helpful, positive, and a well-disciplined classroom, it took me about 6-7 years to get there. I had less and less troubles every year just because of my reputation. Well, when I started at a new school in 2017, I had to start over. Even though my reputation preceded me a little bit, I still had more behavior issues that first year once people were kind of testing me out and figuring out, okay, who is this teacher? Is she going to teach? Is she going to be fair? Is she going to like me? All of those things. But I had one thing and was able to get in that group faster and have better classroom management faster because of this principle of liking my students. Now, when I realized I was doing this and my mom was my mentor as well as my sister Susan, I realized there were some kids I just didn't like. I made a resolution that I would not walk in that classroom unless I could genuinely say I loved every student. Now, there's a difference between love and like. Love means that I genuinely know that every single student is that masterpiece made before time began for good works. They are of worth in God's eyes, so they're of worth in my eyes. And whatever you believe, you know that every human being is of worth. And because they're of worth, we know that we all need to be taught. I still have so much to learn. And hopefully you know that you do too. Or else, why would you be listening to a show like this? So how did I adjust my attitude? So when I made this commitment many years ago, I went to my next door neighbor, Betsy, and I said, okay, Betsy, I'm having trouble with my attitude about a couple of my students, and I need to genuinely in my heart be able to love all of my students. And so if I find that at the beginning of class that I'm having an attitude problem, can I just step over and ask you to watch my class for a minute? Now, this only happened once, and it happened after an assembly. And one of the students I remember that I had in my next period class after the assembly was misbehaving terribly. I had a bad attitude about teaching that student. That student did not do right. They were misbehaving. So when I realized I can't genuinely say I love that student, I popped my head over. I said, Betsy, could you give me 1 second? Ran to the ladies' room. And even though that ladies' room was not the nicest, I did get on my knees and I did ask God to help me love that student. And I got up, went back to my classroom. I've never had to do that since. I usually try to deal with it at home or in my quiet time in the morning or in my drive. As I pray for that student, as I think about that student, I intentionally try to get to know that student. Now, this is a lot of effort, and we are going to talk to someone about teacher engagement in today's show, because sometimes you can't get yourself to that point, but desiring and wanting to respect and like all of your students is so important. Now, I came across Vanessa Van Edwards the other day, and she's big on body language, and she cited an interesting study about people who are popular. Now, as someone who has not really been popular myself, I hesitate with this, but go with me here. She said that when they looked at people who were more popular, they found they had a longer list of people that they liked. They genuinely liked a longer list of people. And I started thinking, when I hear teachers talk at lunch tables through the years, the unhappiest teachers have the longest list of students that they dislike. And what she went on to say is that when you don't like someone, you give off body language to that person, then they respond to you in a way that they don't like you. Now, I'm not a teacher who's here to be liked by everybody. I always tell my students, my goal is that you will absolutely love the experience when you're 23, because some kids are in that short-term mode. Some kids would rather just surf the internet. But I want those students to know that I genuinely like them. So the first thing that I do is I make sure that I call every single student by name as they come into the class. If a student is not there, I always speak well of the empty chair. You want to undermine your credibility? You say, hey, I'm so glad that this student is out, or I'm so glad that that student is out, because you're talking bad about people behind their back. I speak well of people behind their back. I say, hey, have you heard from so-and-so? We're going to miss them today. I hope they're okay. Are they sick, or do I need to email them? What's going on? And just get a little bit. And then if I find a student where I find that no person has messaged them, I try to find a person who knows that student. Say, hey, who has their cell phone number? You want to message them and check on them? I always want every student to be missed and to be asked about, because all of them are a valuable part of my classroom. So I do always address the empty chair, and I call them by name. If you want to know the list of students I like, it is my roster. I can genuinely say that I care about and love each one of those students. But it has taken time. There have been some times where I knew that I was teetering on the edge there of not caring or disliking. I have to separate the behavior from the student. So often, the students who misbehave the most are the ones who need the most grace and love. And there is a time for firm discipline. Do what you say what you do. The third thing I want to talk about, besides liking your students and greeting them by name, is actually something I learned from a great book called Fred Jones' Tools for Teachers. Now, I would hold it up for you if I could, but I have it at school in my library that I keep for new teachers, along with all of my notes, because I have reread that thing many times throughout the years. And he reinforced something my mom had taught me, which is if you got the look, you don't have to open your mouth. The point he made, it was so powerful, is that the moment you open your mouth to disagree with a student, to argue or engage, you lose. That's right, you lose. You lose because often that student wants an audience. They want people to watch. The other thing is everybody else is watching. So you have to remove that audience. But I like to never even get there. If I see a student misbehaving, and I try not to talk the whole time in class, a few times I'll do lectures, but even if I do that, we'll have class conversations, we'll do think, pair, share, all that sort of thing. But if I see a student misbehaving, I'll apply the principle of proximity. I'll move towards that student. Usually that's enough. But if I move towards that student and they don't stop the misbehavior, sometimes I might put my hand on their desk or their table. If that doesn't stop, then I will lean in a little bit towards that student. And I'll usually have, they call it the teacher eyebrow. And I do talk with my eyes. So the teacher eyebrow was not something I had to learn. I think I just got it from my mom, who was a teacher and a military brat. So both of those things came in. Now, if a student really wants an audience, they'll usually look at you and go, "What?" Okay. That means they want an audience. And usually for me, it means that I'm going to have to take it one step further. But even then, if they really say, "What?" I'll just look at them and go, "Okay." And if they really want to engage, then I'll say, "Okay, I'll go right out to the hall. I'll be right there." And I've taken away the audience, but then it gives me the opportunity to have the private conversation. If something's really wrong, I'll tell you 9 times out of 10, when I get all the way to the point of going to the hall, it's because there's something really going on with a student. I have had students admit to me they didn't want to be on this earth. I have had students admit to me that hard things were happening in their lives. I've had students just say, "I didn't get enough sleep last night," or whatever it was. And we can deal with the real problem, but I don't have that behavior happening in my classroom. Because once I say something, it's too easy to say something wrong. It's too easy to disrespect my student as a human being. I have a place of authority. That does not make me better than my students, but it does put me in a place of authority. And our words are powerful. They can build up, they can tear down. I don't want to come across disrespectful. I don't want to come across in a not a right way. Now, have I always been perfect? Absolutely not. But I feel like now I handle probably more things right than wrong. And it's through this. So fourth, find a mentor. Now, this doesn't always mean the teacher with the best reputation in school. Sometimes teachers can be like divas, not always, but sometimes. And when that teacher has that rep, they kind of want to have it themselves, or they may not know how to verbalize what they do. If they don't know how to verbalize, that teacher would be a good one to observe what's going on in their classroom, because they may not can verbalize, but you'll notice the difference. You'll notice what happens. And I always look for teachers who don't have difficulty with students, who speak well of their students. If I hear a teacher who often speaks poorly of their students, I kind of go the other direction. Now, I want to bring this up because students should hear you speak well of students. If your lunchroom situation is that you have the teacher's table and then you have student tables all around and they can overhear conversations, as often is the case, you can't speak ill of any student in a public place ever, because the walls have ears and it always gets back to them. "I heard Miss So-and-so doesn't like you," or "I heard you did this." Be really careful about this, because it is a way that you undermine your own reputation. So don't talk ill about a student in public. Now, let's say you're in the teacher's lounge. So you're talking, and there's 2 ways you can talk. You can whine and complain, and you can ask for constructive feedback. Now, my friend Dawn, who I've had on the show before, I can go in her room and I can say, "Okay, how do you work with this student? How do you have success with a student? What makes this student tick? What are the things that this student really likes?" to try to constructively figure out how to get better with that student. So when I have a student that I am struggling with, I will find teachers who don't have that struggle, and I'll figure out what they're doing. Okay, that is a positive thing, a professional network helping me be better. But sitting down, as I have mistakenly done in the past, when I'm having a rough day or I'm tired, and talking about this and talking about that and whining about this, and this student didn't show up, this student skipped my class, this student didn't study, this student's not going to do well. Oh, and I can get that way, particularly with my AP class, because the stakes are so high. Last year, I had a 100% pass rate. So the pressure's on. It's like, I want to do a good job, but I can only control what I can control. I can't control them and whether they study. So I have to bring my A game and do my best, but I can't verbalize my worries or concerns because it can come across as negative. Toxic waste. Okay, negative talk is toxic waste because negativity is contagious. Now, I'm going to quote something else that I heard Vanessa Van Edwards say, and I hope I get these percentages right, but I'm going to get the direction right. She said that when you work within 20 of a positive performer, a positive person, that the improvement, I believe it was around 10%. So when you're nearby someone who's a high achiever, you become more of a high achiever. It's the multiplier effect. Read the book Multipliers. Fantastic book about this. But when you work near a low performer with a negative attitude, the decrease in your performance is around 30%. I've had people on the show before who have talked about negativity and how to deal with it. Do check out the interview I did with Sam Nix at coolcatteacher.com/E875, where he really talks about school culture and all that sort of thing. But I don't want to be the toxic waste. I have my one person, I can talk to that person, and then I try to stay positive. And I do want others to hold me accountable. I fall, I fail, I mess up. And every time I do, I have to just adjust my attitude, pray about it, and move forward. Now, the next book that I read was Harry Wong's First Days of School, and the changes in my classroom were even exponentially better. Sometimes the misbehavior is because students don't know what they're doing. They don't have the classroom procedures. So Harry Wong's First Days of School is even for a veteran teacher. It's one of the best books I've ever read, along with Fred Jones' Tools for Teachers, about, do you have the procedures for coming in your classroom? What happens as you come in your classroom? Do students know what that is? Do they know what to expect? Do they know how you interact and what you do? And to get busy right the moment that they come in. So understanding those procedures, thinking through those. And I like to Pareto my problems. Pareto's principle is that 20% of the problems cause 80% of the issues. So when I realize that my classroom is not in a place that I want it to be, I look at what are those problems. Now, you might say, well, it is a student, or it is a student or two. Well, what I do in my classroom is if I'm getting students for the first time, a lot of times in 7th grade, I'll go to their prior teachers and let them help me come up with a seating chart. But after that, I really want students to have choices. So that'll let them sit where they want to. But if I see that there's a group dynamic of 2 or 3 that are just not going to get with the program, and they just can't control themselves when they're next to each other, they have no impulse control, I'll privately go and say, hey guys, I don't do a seating chart, but I am about to do one. I'm giving you a notice that if I have a problem again, we're getting a seating chart at the beginning of class tomorrow. If I feel like it's a whole class, I'll say that. And then I do the seating chart. I'll try it for a couple of weeks. If it works well, that's great. And then at the end, I'll say, hey guys, we have our new seating chart. It's working better, but do you want to try to go back and let you have choices again? Or do we need to stay in this? Usually they'll go back and then it'll be fine. But you always reserve the right to put students in the seat that they need to go in. And separate them, because that's just part of what you have to do. And that brings up something that I learned from my mom. My mom was also a computer teacher, and she taught in the same room that I taught in my first 16 years. And she said, Vicki, what fixes most computer problems? And I said, well, Mom, rebooting the computer. And she said, yep, you're right. Rebooting the computer fixes most problems. She said, do you realize you can reboot your classroom any day you want? And I'm like, oh, really, Mom? She said, yeah. So rebooting your classroom, what that means is that at the end of class, I'll say, okay, guys, this and this didn't go right. So I'll specifically state what did not go right. And I will remind them of the procedures for in the morning. And I'll say, okay, when you come in class tomorrow, I want you to do this, this, and this. We've got to do better about getting our computers and opening them and getting going, or you've got to do better about bringing your chargers or whatever the issue is. So we'll start that when you come into class. That's what we're doing. And then I remember the next day that I'm reinforcing what I just said about the behavior that needs to correct itself. And again, it's about the behavior. There are students who exhibit certain behaviors more, but it is about the behavior and trying to get the behavior so that we can focus on learning. I have my students for 48 minutes. That's not a lot of time to me. Some of you have block scheduling. You have them for 90 minutes. It probably sometimes feels like forever, but when you have trouble is when you don't have structure and people don't know what they're doing. Because if it turns into just a study hall, that's always a recipe for misbehavior and a disaster. That's why I overplan for my substitute teachers. And every so often I will have to reboot my classes. And I just say it. I say, hey, we're rebooting. This is what we're doing. I'll explain it. And then we move forward, and then that issue is corrected. Teaching is a craft that you can learn. And if I'm making mistakes, I don't have to be stuck in it. If you don't have the classroom of your dreams, if you're living a nightmare, but if somebody else has a classroom of their dreams, that means you can learn what they do. There is hope for you. You can do things. Now, though, let's talk about why we can't engage students, because we as the teacher, we're not engaged. We're going to talk to 20-year veteran educator Michelle Singh about this topic. I'm so excited today to be talking with Michelle Singh. She's a national board certified teacher, the founder of The Restful Teacher, the CEO of LCTE Learning Solutions, and she has over 20 years serving in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools as a teacher district leader and consultant. She now has over 10 years as an adjunct professor of teacher education. So, Michelle, we talk about student engagement. In the pre-show, you and I were really talking about an aspect of student engagement that we really need to discuss. When you think about student engagement, and what is the work you're currently doing in that area?
Actually doing my dissertation right now around the disengagement of Black students in classrooms, and particularly language arts, secondary language arts classroom. So I'm doing a lot of work around student engagement, and I've talked to lots of educators as it relates to ways that they successfully engage students, or challenges that they have in engaging students, and factors leading to the student disengagement, everything from issues with their home life, their community life, their behavioral, social, emotional. There are so many layers to student disengagement, and it is not because students are lazy, and it's not because students don't have discipline. Think of the iceberg. It's not all what you see at the top. There's so much more below the surface that causes the disengagement of students. But one of the things that has really stood out to me when it comes to engagement, it's the way that disengagement happens just in our education system, especially for women educators, women education leaders, women educators of color. I have noticed in conversations with my clients as a consultant that we are disengaged, just like our students. And in order for us to truly tap into what we need to really be there and to serve and to support our students the way that they deserve, we have to fix our own disengagement, our own disconnection. And there are a lot of things that causes us to disconnect. It could be traumas from our childhood that are not addressed, that we're not even aware of. It could be the toxic work environments that we're part of.
Yeah.
It could be, burnout, not prioritizing our well-being and our rest, not resting. It could be having too much happening in our
Yeah,
families.
taking care of an elderly parent, taking care of a
Absolutely.
child. I've even seen it where you work so hard and you give everything and you have this great idea just to have the next initiative supplant that idea and it's gone. And you're thinking,
Yes.
well, what am I working for? You told me this was big and now this is not big anymore. Or you have principal turnover. I mean, there's so many things besides just the exhaustion that you and I both know, whether you're a professor or teacher, there's that exhaustion and we have to relate to educate. But that takes a lot
Oh
of
my gosh.
effort.
It does. I love that. You have to relate to educate. I was just talking to my class. I just finished one of my college classes with aspiring teachers, and relationships are the most important. I mean, I heard it echoed in the room. Every experience that they've shared with a teacher who influenced them was because of trust, was because of safety, was because of relationships.
Well, and that's what you talk about with Miss Hernandez.
Oh yeah. So in my TED talk, I do talk about Miss Fernandez, my Spanish teacher. So one of the things that I'll always remember Miss Fernandez for is her ability to see me. To see me exactly as who I was, this little immigrant girl coming from Jamaica with the heavy accent, with the bushy hair, with the school uniform, the only kid in the class wearing a uniform because that's what we did in Jamaica. The only kid in class who stood up to speak because that's what we did in Jamaica. The kid that everyone laughed at where other teachers stayed silent. She was the one that made me feel seen, that told me it was okay to be me. And she was also the one that gave me incredible learning experiences that I didn't really recognize were incredible until I became a teacher myself. And I started tapping, looking back and tapping into her own strategies and implementing them in my own practice.
And we have all these kids that are hurting and that need us. And teaching is noble. I mean, you talk about a profession that is so needed and so noble. And the percentages that you shared in your TED Talk of African American teachers, so 2% of teachers in America are African American male and 7% are African American women.
Yeah.
And if you're not engaged, like we need more. We don't need to lose the ones we have. What do we do, Michelle?
What do we do?
Yeah, what do we do? I mean, this is a big deal.
That's the magic question, right? And it's addressing that disconnection in yourself, addressing the reason why you don't feel fulfilled. Because if you're not fulfilled, how are you going to show up and do a job that's so important if you don't feel fulfilled, right? And I know I have been there where I've shown up and have been on autopilot and didn't even realize I was on autopilot. And that didn't serve me and it did not serve my students. So how do we get from that to feeling so full inside where we're able to serve from a place of fulfillment rather than a place of sacrifice?
And, some days, even if I'm totally in sync with my teaching, I don't feel it. So I show up anyway. So there's that. But there is this huge systemic problem of teacher disengagement. Teachers are hurt. They're wounded. They need to relate to their administrator. Some of them don't feel that. Some of them don't feel relating to their teacher across the hall. So where does a teacher start who's listening to you and they are not in their head in the car or as they're washing dishes or sitting down to grade and they are just nodding and they are like, Michelle, you are right. Where do they start?
You have to start with acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that you are disconnected, that you are not fulfilled, that you realize that I have been on autopilot for so long. I am burnt out. I need help. You have to start with acknowledgement. And when you start with acknowledgement, then you're starting to confront the behaviors and the beliefs that are keeping you stuck in that lack of fulfillment. So you start with acknowledgement. Like really think about what does fulfillment mean to you? Like what is it to be fulfilled? What is it to feel like your cup is full? What is it to feel like I am totally connected with my why? And I have defined success on my terms and not society's standards and not someone else's standards. What does that feel like to me? What does that look like to me? I think you have to define those things for yourself and you have to acknowledge beliefs and behaviors that are not serving you well. And I'll tell you this, it's not something you could do alone. I say this to folks that I serve, that I have how there's the A team. I have the Michelle team. That's God. That's my therapist. That's a coach, and that's a community, because you can't do this work alone. I have to have those 4 things to be able to say, okay, this is when perfectionism is coming in. This is when that limiting belief is coming in. This is when that imposter syndrome is coming in. This is when those things are coming in to keep me stuck. And here's what I can do to allow me to move forward in that.
So I've been teaching 23 years now, and my worst case of burnout happened when I literally had 7 classes. I was the IT director for the school at a little tiny school here in South Georgia, and I was given prom and National Honor Society. And sometimes break duty and lunch duty, and the whole thing is ridiculous, and there's a backstory behind it. But that year, I don't know how to say it, but I was losing it. So I did have to go to those who were close to me. I guess you could say the Vicky team. And then I actually went and had a talk with my principal, and I said, listen, I'm not being able to work out. I need this year, the rest of the year, can you take break duty and lunch duty off of me and let me put on my tennis shoes and walk around the track? And then I had some friends and some family who really, really supported me. But I think that if I had not acknowledged, okay, I've got a problem. This is a problem, and you can't positive think yourself out of reality. When you have too much, it's too much. And, the big thing is going to people with solutions and not just complaining. Because I think when we just complain, administrators just don't hear us, because part of their deal is to solve problems. So they're looking for solutions, but it's hard when you get there, Michelle. I mean, speaking from experience, some teachers feel like there's no option but to quit. I mean, that's just where they are.
Oh, I know. I've been there.
You have?
I have been there.
Tell me about it.
I have been there where I felt that I just didn't have another way out. My health was at risk. My mental health, my emotional health, my physical health, all of that was at risk because of the work environment that I was in. And I had gotten to the point where I just could not take it anymore. I literally broke down in tears in the office of my supervisor. She was actually the supervisor of my supervisor. She was a superintendent. And I left shortly after that. After 15 years in the public school system, I chucked up the deuces and I left. Now, I am still connected. I still do work as a consultant and I still serve. However, I do it on my own terms.
Yeah.
So I've been there. I've been on the edge of, like you said, I've been burnt out. Burnt out to where I couldn't do anything else but leave.
Yeah. So we acknowledge that there is the time where you have to
step away.
There is that time.
And it's not easy to step away. And I'll tell you this, 15 years in a career and you don't know what's next. It's not easy to step away, but when your health and your family and you are looking at all of those things and that you might not be here in a couple of years because your health is getting so bad and your emotional health, your physical health and all of that, then you have to make a decision to prioritize yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of us don't do. We are great at doing everything for everybody else, saying yes to everything, but we don't prioritize ourselves. And that's one of the things that I've learned to do in the past couple of years is say yes to myself. Say yes to myself and say no and set boundaries.
Boundaries is a great word. I'm a people pleaser. And so through my life, I've often said yes too much. And there are seasons where you have to evaluate that. So I love my classroom, but as I've looked at my life right now, there's some things, not my classroom, but some other things that I've said yes to that this season, it has to be a no, because when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. So when I say yes to everybody else, I'm saying no to my children or no to my husband or no to my dad who needs me right now. And so part of living life is adjusting to the seasons. Right now in Camilla, Georgia, we had 8 inches of snow. And so when I go outside right now, I have to wear what I would wear in Wyoming or New York. I don't wear these types of clothes usually. So I have to adjust to that season. And there's a season where you have to say, okay, I need to look and talk to my principal and get some duties adjusted or something because I do want to stay teaching. Or there's a time to shift and say, okay, maybe I need to do something else or do it a different way. Michelle Singh, you have so many things to encourage us with. Could we finish with a pep talk for teachers as they go into 2025 and head back into their classrooms and are just need some encouragement? What would you say to them?
I would say, as you're coming back to school, 2025, school is, you got a couple months left. Believe in who you are, trust in whose you are, and just know that you have enough, you are enough, and you have everything that you need to do the work that you're called to do. In addition, it's so important to celebrate the small wins.
Yes.
We don't take time to do that. The smallest things. A kid smiled at you today. A kid said, "Hey, miss, I like your shoes." The smallest wins. I would say celebrate the small wins and write them down, because you're going to need to go to those to help boost you up when you're not feeling your best and when you're not feeling you're not enough, but know that you are enough.
I love how Michelle brought out some conversation about when I've had to reflect. And in these 23 years, I'm always reflecting about what do I need to do? What needs to change? Honestly, this radio TV show has changed a lot in my life. And I had to ask some hard questions about balance and life. Sometimes you have choices. Sometimes it seems like you don't. But you always have a choice on how you respond to what happens to you. You don't have a choice what happens to you, but you have choices, and you also can name what's happening to you. I'm afraid. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm fearful. I'm worn out from taking care of these kids and feeding my family. Like, if you can name it, then you can start figuring out how to move forward. I'd also like to give a warning here. I was in an educator group the other day, and they talked about how they were using ChatGPT as a therapist. Okay, I can't think of a worse idea. Somebody who has no stake in the game, no liability, no experience as a human is just going to parrot what they hear humans write about how to deal with a specific issue. If you need a therapist, get a therapist. If you don't have a pastor, find a church and get a pastor so they can speak truth into your life. Pick out the books you read so they can speak truth. Pick out the podcasts and radio shows that you listen to so they can speak truth into your life, because you become like the people that you hang around and that you listen to and who you let speak truth into your life. I always love it when I come across these teachers who are just doing the most fantastic things that truly are engaging students. I know for me, having that hook and those projects that really pull students in is a wonderful thing. And Andrew Vanden Heuvel is using Fortnite Creative to teach physics. Let's hear what he's doing. Today we're talking with Andrew Vanden Heuvel. He is an astronomy professor, educational consultant, gamer, and he's even been into zero gravity flight. So as we were talking before the show, he says he always has his head in space. Now, Andrew, today we're talking about Fortnite Physics. So this is right. Game-based learning, experiential learning, so many different things. Tell us about what your resource is.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. You know, when most people think of Fortnite, they think about the game that all their students are obsessed with. You know, it's all about guns and shooting and fighting. What they're not aware of is there's this whole other world called Fortnite Creative. And your students have heard of this because they're playing these islands, these maps that have been created by a whole community of creators. And so what I did is, as an educator and as a Fortnite player, boy, I was seeing all this cool physics and math in the game. And I saw an opportunity to create educational maps and islands. And so I learned more about this Fortnite Creative and ultimately got a grant from Epic Games in order to make some educational islands in my area, which is physics, as well as some curriculum that teachers can use for these islands.
So you've literally constructed educational islands in Fortnite. Are these accessible to the public?
Yeah, absolutely. I almost think of them as virtual laboratories. And like one of the things that's so exciting to me about this is that, in a virtual world, there's so many things you can do that you can't do in a traditional classroom. With my experiments, students can jump out of a hot air balloon and explore skydiving to find their free fall acceleration and the terminal velocity, right? They can launch themselves out of a cannon to see whether the physics of this world follows the same rules of projectile motion. And they can race a shopping cart, a motorcycle, and a UFO to see which one has the highest velocity inside the game. So there's all kinds of crazy things that you can do in this virtual environment that would never be possible. But I realized that Fortnite's not always accessible to students and teachers in the classroom. And so the curriculum also has what I call sort of data collection videos, which are actual screen captures of the game that allow students to collect all the data they would need to complete a really simple, I almost think of it like a one class period, 45-minute exercise that uses Fortnite as the data collection tool.
So what's your answer to the educators and parents who say, well, you're just encouraging first-person shooter and don't we have enough violence in schools? What's your answer to that?
Yeah, totally. Fortnite Creative and the islands that I'm creating have no guns in them whatsoever, right? And when you create your own island, you can set the rules however you want. So yeah, these islands live in Fortnite. And so that's probably why some schools are going to be opposed to it. But there's another opportunity here that I think is really exciting, and that is getting students to be the creators of these spaces. For educators maybe who haven't thought about Fortnite in this way, I think Minecraft is a helpful analogy, right? The tools of Fortnite Creative are so sophisticated and robust and accessible. They can be done on a Nintendo Switch, that students can be learning about game design and all the transferable skills that come with that, linking devices and kind of the logic and construction of games that comes with that. All of that can be done in Fortnite Creative, which is this super high interest game where students already are.
So 2 years ago in a Genius project, some of my ninth graders decided to simulate D-Day and the landing on a Omaha beach.
Right.
And so they actually took the information on the number of machine guns that were on the cliffs and the rate of fire and the number of people who were on the beach. And they ran multiple simulations, and they were just inviting hundreds and hundreds of people in. And when they presented their project, it was one of the most meaningful things I've ever seen. So these kids, they did allow guns, but it was authentic guns from the period. Right. And you selected which place you were going to play. And this is what they found. They said, what we discovered is that the only way to win the game was to have so many people on the beach that you simply could not kill them all because the rate of fire was so high, it was completely unwinnable.
Right.
And the whole room got quiet. And one of the boys said, Miss Davis, I think I finally understand more about what happened on D-Day.
Yeah. Wow. That's
and it was very powerful. There's no learning curve for taking kids in to learn about physics. They're going to be learning physics because they don't have to learn how to play the game, even if the teachers don't know the game.
Well, that's just it. And I think your story illustrates all the potential outside of the sciences, like for storytelling types of exercises inside the game. Another feature that Fortnite has that not a lot of people know about is called replays. And so even if you go into something you made, the entire 3D environment is captured and saved inside the game. And then a student or whoever can go back through with a virtual camera in that space and record screen captures. And you can create, it's almost like a 3D engine for storyboarding.
Yes.
And a whole story can be created in that space. So I had students last summer do this on a wildfire prevention project in partnership with an organization in California to create educational videos on wildfire prevention using Fortnite as the storytelling vehicle. So there's so many different angles to this. And one thing I just got to say, because I know some of your listeners are going to get this, is that Fortnite is the most robust version of the metaverse that we have today. When most people think of the metaverse, they think of wearing goggles, but that's not, the metaverse is a 3D social environment. And Fortnite is an example of that, where people are meeting in this 3D environment. They're embodied in this character. But more than anything else, Fortnite has all the intellectual property. You can play as Darth Vader, Spider-Man. All of these licensing deals have happened. They're all in Fortnite, and it's going to continue to grow. So So this idea of these islands and these universes where you have the Disney universe where there are no guns, but Mickey Mouse can go play with a Star Wars character, like this is where it's going to happen. And it's happening now and it's coming more soon.
Yes. So there's a lot of Fortnite islands and activities that are completely gun free, but are rich learning experiences. And here's the thing, we have got to engage our students in powerful learning experiences. We know experiential learning is so powerful in physics. When I've interviewed physics teachers before, it's like, oh, let's make a trebuchet. Well, not every school can afford or wants to make a massive trebuchet, but they're actually able to experiment and do things. So let's talk about physics. Physics is not entirely easy to understand until you can perhaps see it.
That's totally true. And wouldn't it be great if instead of doing a little pendulum in the laboratory, students could be on a swing that's 30 meters tall and they can experience the centripetal acceleration that you feel? Well, that's the kind of thing that we can do inside a video game. Students ask these questions. Why do I ever have to learn this? When am I ever going to use these equations or this math that I'm learning in class? And what we've seen already in the experiments that we've designed is some really surprising results. One is gravity inside Fortnite. I've talked to PhD physicists who got their degrees from Harvard and Princeton. Every physicist will tell you that inside a video game, gravity must be less than what we experience here on Earth because the characters are flying through the air, the cars are flying through the air. Well, when students can go and measure this, and it can be done in a middle school classroom, you come across this really surprising solution, which is that gravity inside Fortnite is actually 3 times the gravity on Earth. When I first did this, I thought, surely I've gotten this wrong. But if you rearrange the equations that you normally teach in the high school classroom, you can ask the question, well, what do I want gravity to be in a video game? I want players to jump really high, but I don't want them to be in the air for a long time. You know, like when astronauts were on the moon bounding, they're like in the air, and that makes for really slow gameplay. What that means is a game designer had to rearrange these equations and say, what value of gravity do I want for my player? I want him to jump high, but I want him to come down fast. And the only way to do that is actually to have high gravity with really strong legs so that you're really high, right? And it's a solution that's unexpected. It's a problem that you could never do in a traditional classroom. And even the smartest physicists I've ever met were surprised by the result. But it justifies to a student, see, you know, you want to be a game designer someday? There's a shocking amount of physics and math that goes into making fun and enjoyable games. And it's not about being realistic. It's about being fun. And we have to use physics to understand that.
Well, we see esports growing in schools for a reason. And we see scholarships happening at the college level for a reason. And there are many that predict within the next few years, if it hasn't already happened, that there will be more revenue generated with big esports events in stadiums than with traditional sporting events. So, and there's still sweat involved, right? Because they're working hard. So this is a kind of a generational thing, but I just want to encourage teachers that sometimes teachers will say, well, I don't know how to play Fortnite, so I can't use it. No. You can have a student in it on your board viewing every single thing they do, and you still have control because you can talk to the student and you can have those experiments. And plus, tell us about the resource you've built. Is it something that teachers can just go to and follow?
Absolutely. That was the goal is to make it zero barrier to entry. You do not have to do anything with Fortnite to use this resource. So if people want to go to andrewvh.com, they'll find links out to my Fortnite Physics project. And there are 4 activities that are ready to go. A shareable Google Doc that they can copy and edit. That includes a link to an introductory video that kind of explains the project to the student, like that experiment. A link to a spreadsheet that students can use to record their data, and also a link to this data collection video. So the whole project can be done with just those resources. They don't ever have to even open Fortnite. So the students don't even really need experience with it. But there's also links to the island code. So if the students are familiar, the teacher has a way to bring Fortnite into the classroom. It's simply a matter of typing in that island code and the student can open that experiment themselves. One other piece I'd like to connect to esports if I can. Because of this Fortnite Physics project, I've developed some connections with a library system as well as our statewide esports consortium. And what we're trying to do is encourage students to be the creators of their own games, starting with Fortnite Creative, and to do that in a competitive way. And so we've run a few contests. We ran a contest this summer related to the Olympics, where students were invited to create their own Olympic event using Fortnite Creative, right? We give them the tools to learn how to create something, and then we give them kind of a showcase where they can show off what they've made.
We want our students to be creators, not just consumers. And if you look at a future with artificial intelligence, the thing that AI really can't do is create. It can create as a result of what we ask it to create. But the true creativity comes from the prompt engineers, the people who are coming up with these creative ideas. And so that's so important. So Andrew Vanden Heuvel, fantastic Fortnite Physics that you're sharing for free. There are ways to hook students into learning. In last week's episode, I actually had a teacher who was using the Minecraft to get students excited about writing. There are always ways to pull students in. Sometimes it's with pop culture. Sometimes it's just with that powerful hands-on project-based learning that students need so they can be creative and they can build the cooperative learning abilities that they need to be successful in a world that's full of AI. AI can do a lot of things, but it can't be human. It can't interact with humans, and it can't work through those problems. And we talked about the importance when you work with somebody who is a high achiever, how you become more of a high achiever. And when you work with someone with a negative attitude, how you become less performing. And so we need to be the kind of people that can build what Adam Grant calls collective intelligence in his book, Hidden Potential, which is another great read for you. So as we finish up, just pick one strategy that works for you. I want to point out a study I read many years ago, and it said that cows, yes, I said cows, C-O-W-S, cows that were given names gave more milk than cows that did not have a name. So if you just called it cow, it's just going to give a certain amount of milk. But when you called it by name, something biological in that cow likes to have an identity, likes to be known. As part of being a being and a human, we like to be known. Our names are important. Now, I have struggled for many years, believe it or not, with short-term memory, with working memory. These are some things I struggle with. But that's one reason I call every student by name. I look at them. I make sure they're there. I know where they're sitting, and it's to implant it in my brain so that I make sure that I call them by name and I know them. We've given a lot of advice for classroom management, but it just comes down to you have to relate to educate. We have to build relationships with our students and understand the things that excite them and get them ready to learn, as well as knowing ourselves and what are our strengths. The strategies for the teacher down the hall might not work for you. I'm a judge for the Global Teacher Prize and just got a note in my inbox that it's time to judge the prizes again. And I've seen tap dancing teachers, and I've seen teachers who bring all these interests into the classroom. Well, if I was a tap dancing teacher, I'd be a busting it teacher because I would fall. I could not be a tap dancing teacher. That strategy, that wouldn't work for me. But I can be Vicki Davis, Cool Cat teacher, who talks to you on radio and TV and interviews all these amazing people and talks about my amazing students and loves this profession of teaching that I was born to do. Even though I started out in business, I was born to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. She's helped me be a better teacher. And so as you finish up, now that I'm in my career and I've been doing this 23 years, I'm always looking for new teachers to encourage and help. And a lot of what I've given you is advice for those new teachers. In fact, I'm going to start sending this and then also giving the advice in person. So I hope if you've kind of arrived and you know you got that rep, they know that you're an excellent teacher. You know your subject. You love your students. You work really, really hard. All the kids who misbehave for other people, they're great in your classroom. and you've got, quote, it's time to share it. It's time to find other teachers who need help with it. It's time to pass it forward and build our profession. It is hard to be a teacher, and I know that lots of teachers are quitting all over the place. But I believe if change is going to happen, it's from the ground up. And that teachers are the ground. I shouldn't even say that. But truthfully, it's going to be from the classroom out. It's going to be teacher to teacher. It's going to be mentoring, encouraging, helping. When people have a bad day, encourage them. Don't judge them. Everybody has a bad day. You need somebody to vent to. So you talk to that person privately. You help them through it. You figure out how they can reboot. You figure out where they can go. And you give them hope. There are teachers in the toughest schools in this world who are acing it. I once saw an amazing teacher in South Africa. She had 500 kids in her classroom. 500 kids in her classroom sitting on cement blocks. Now, how do you do that? I can't even imagine. But I met an amazing teacher in South Africa who was that teacher, who could command 500 students in a room, high school students. So we all have tough situations. Your situation is different from mine. No, I don't know what you're going through, but I do know this. Our teaching profession has been around a long time. There are a lot of truths that we pass down from generation to generation. And when you know that you've got your teaching down and you love it, and even though it's hard, you have some truth to share with other teachers, sit down, encourage them, go buy them their favorite soft drink and put a little note on it, a sticky note that you're thinking about them. Or like during one of my worst times, I had somebody who would buy a little tiny little Snicker bar and they would write a little sticky note and say, I hope you can have a little Snicker today. Just find a way to encourage and help, because we can get better at classroom management. We can improve our classroom, and never say you have arrived, because I had some issues I dealt with not too long ago. And if I brag on myself, my dad always says, never brag on your children or your dog because they will disappoint you. And he went and bragged on the dog, Doc, that he had never gone to the bathroom in the house. And it was at Christmas, and he looks up and that dog lifts his leg and goes to the bathroom on the tree. I am not kidding. Right there in front of everybody. And he said, I should have followed my own advice. I never brag on my dog or my children because they will do whatever it is you say they never do. So I'm not going to brag on myself. What I'm going to tell you is there's a lot that I've learned. There are a lot of mistakes that I've made. I love you, educators. I want you to be successful, and I want us to help each other become better at this profession. Thank you so much for tuning into Cool Cat Teacher Talk, where we talk about what matters in the classroom. This has been Season 2, Episode 4, and you can see the show notes at coolcatteacher.com/talk classroom management. Thanks for listening.
Stay in the loop. Visit coolcatteacher.com. See you later, educators.